Hi everyone. In this video we'll discuss a couple more things. In particular, we'll discuss why we have time 1 on the horizontal axis and time 0 on the vertical axis. My cousin asked me why we do it that way rather than the other way around, and we'll explain that. We'll also do one more criterion on the definition of law of one price that we talked about in the last video, and we'll also talk about sort of another definition for arbitrage or arbitrage free. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll first search, gotta put my last name. We'll search for me, and then we'll do this pricing in a one asset market. Okay, we'll open an app. And the first thing we'll do is answer the question about why is time 0 on the y-axis and time 1 on the x-axis. You know, it might feel more intuitive to have these the other way around, right? And the answer to that question is because usually our goal in asset pricing, which is kind of the subject we're studying, is you have some idea of the payoffs that you want in the future. Say I want $4 in the future. The question is, given certain prices and certain prices of the assets that currently exist in the market and the payoff you desire in the future, what is the price of that payoff, right? So you can sort of think of it as a function, and the payoffs in the future are the domain or the input to the function, and the function's y value or output is the price today. Okay, so that's why we do it. This is sort of what might seem counterintuitively to put the later date on the x-axis and then the current date on the y-axis. But that's the reason we do that. So that sort of answers that question. And then also you'll see in a later video, but most of the time you'll see this as price and payoff. Another thing you can do is sort of feel like you're in, Finance 101 and call these cash flows and time 0. And you can call this cash flow and time 1, right? And I moved it down here just because price and cash flow are kind of negative, right? So if we previously had price up here and it was like $1, right? Now that would be a negative cash flow because we're paying for this asset, right? So, $1 putting under your mattress, $1 gives you $1 in the future because it doesn't change, but it also costs you $1 today. So I kind of like to, I personally like to think in terms of these cash flows, but it's more of a notational change than anything. I think it allows for other things to be easier in the future. So this is what I'll do most of the time is I'll call these cash flows instead of a price. And then this will be negative today usually. And this, again, this is still your function value. This is still your y value. So if you want $4 in the future, you're going to have to pay negative $4, or you're going to have to pay $4 today. So your cash flow is negative 4 today. So that's sort of why vertical, and that's sort of a little notation change there. And then, so the next thing we want to do is we want to talk about, I'll just write these down here. So y vertical, or tie 0 is vertical axis. And then the next question is law of one price, single value, and I'll explain what I mean. And then proportionality constant greater than 0, or I'm going to call it less than 0, arbitrage free. Okay, so that's just sort of the outline of what we're going to talk about. So we already talked about bullet number 1. Bullet number 2, we talked about in the last video, sort of the definition of the law of one price. There's one thing that I forgot to mention there is that it also needs to be a function. So, I mean, it's almost self-evident, right? So it's got to be a function, right? Because if it's a multi-valued function, if you have 4 here and the y value is -4, you can't also have a y value of -5 because that would be a multi-valued function. And that might seem self-evident, but it'll be a useful kind of technicality later. So I kind of wanted to mention that as one more requirement on the law of one price. And then the last thing is one characterization of arbitrage or arbitrage free. So in the last video, we talked about how to have the law of one price, really this function just needs to go through zero, needs to be linear, aka the functional form of that is just I'm gonna put a little more text here. I'm gonna say, so it's gonna be like y is equal to kx, right? Where k is some proportionality constant. In this case, our k is -1, and then if we move this down a little bit, now our k is -2, right? And k is -1, k is 0, k is +1, and so on. Right, so all of these situations, all of these markets that I'm showing you right now, our k is negative because we're going down here. And these are all the scenarios in which we are arbitrage free. So once you come up here, now we are not arbitrage free. That's when k is positive. So that is a characterization of arbitrage or arbitrage free, is just the sign on this proportionality constant k. So depending on if you're talking about cash flow or price, so if you're talking about cash flow, k needs to be negative for arbitrage free, and if k is positive, then you have an arbitrage. But if all of a sudden you're talking about if it's price, then that sort of flips, and a positive k means arbitrage free, and this is the way you'll see it in most textbooks, and a negative means there is an arbitrage. But again, I sort of like to think about it in terms of cash flow, and you can do it however you like. Cash flow. So for in most of these videos, the characterization for arbitrage free is that k is negative, and a characterization for arbitrage is if k is positive. Okay, and that might seem like a small thing, but it's actually pretty deep. So the law of one price sort of comes first, and then arbitrage free comes second. So the law of one price means we have this functional form, and arbitrage free means, okay, not only do we have this functional form, but we also know that this k is a negative number, right? So the law of one price can hold, and k can be positive, and it can be way up here. So law of one price holds, but arbitrage free does not. But now they both hold because our k is a negative number. So again, so this functional form means the law of one price, and this functional form with a particular sign on k determines whether or not it's arbitrage free. And that makes sense because all we're saying is, okay, does positive pay off in the future? Does that cost money, or do you get money to do that? And of course, it only makes sense if that costs money today, so k should be negative. And that's all we've got here. So thank you.